And this comes to the point of like what you brought up in the last podcast, right? This is the importance of preserving not just like our perception of the world, as limited as it is with our sensory perception tools and our experiences based on those areas of perception and those factors of perception, but like trying to preserve the whole potential of that ecosystem, which we are like, a part of ourselves. And so like, in order for us even to survive, we must uphold and like protect the greater ecosystem to ensure that we are able to continue our own consciousness, because without all those players around us that have all these levels of consciousness that we can't even perceive, maybe we won't even be able to support our own existence without it anymore. And so the task for this future super intelligent general AI being that's going to preserve the human race is to preserve the entire ecosystem of consciousness, not just our own, because you never know, by preserving us and ignoring something else, it might put us at risk anyway.
Well, what if I could task it with something even more difficult than that, which would be the translation of conscious experience?
Well,
You know,
that would be interesting.
if AI, let's say, I mean, AI is able to display a level of faux empathy, towards us at the moment. It's able to mimic empathy on an incredible level, like already. So now
But it also has levels of consciousness that we don't understand either. Like if you give if you give an LLM like so many parameters worth of information, like the ability to read every single piece of text that's ever been written across the whole of humanity, and like you ask her a question and it's able to like cross-reference against everything that's ever been written and like formulate like its own like hallucinations based on that stuff. That is a form of consciousness that we cannot compute as humans. That's not the same form of consciousness
I,
and thinking that we go through.
I don't disagree with you, but I do need to point out we have a tendency to anthropomorphize, which is like
No,
one of
no,
our
no.
fundamental
Wait. Like
needs.
you talked about panpsychic and
Yeah,
stuff like that. Like
yeah,
everything has a form of consciousness.
yeah.
Everything from a stone to to humans. Like if we're on the top of this hierarchy at the moment.
So like I love panpsychism. Don't get me wrong.
Mm.
It's not mainstream.
Yeah. But like it should be
It's
mainstream.
but the problem is that we can't prove any of it.
Yeah, but like that's the problem with our perception and our consciousness in this century, or not this century, in this mode of production based on capitalism. We have founded that in a bourgeois ideology, and bourgeois ideology is based on rational thought and reason. It is the reason that we have the scientific revolution, the industrial revolution, all that sort of stuff. But rational thinking and reason is not the pinnacle of human consciousness or human intelligence. We've lived in many societies before where we've used spirituality, used emotional intelligence, and use our connection to the environment, like when we were, hunters and gatherers and evolving and stuff like that, and like social forms of intelligence that like, preceded or didn't require the same level of rational or reason oriented thinking as we give preference to today. I think it's just a bias that we put so much emphasis on reason and rationality today. You can look at the dog that wants to sniff the grass, and like, because people will argue that dogs don't have consciousness because only humans have consciousness, kind of thing, because we can express it.
yeah.
But like I can tell that dog is conscious of what's
There
going
is
on over
something
there.
it's like to be that dog. Like,
But like, because we can't say that like rationally, because we can't run the right scientific experiment and isolate it exactly and define it, then like with our rational hats on and our reason thinking hats on,
yeah,
then like we're reserved to say that that dog doesn't have consciousness because I can't put it in a laboratory and test it properly. I don't know.
one 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 idea that I'd sort of been toying with was, and this kind of broadly relates to the global workspace theory, is this idea of, okay, if an organism, let's go with an organism, for example, has some type, can perceive, or can sense, not even perceive, can sense some type of information about its environment, and respond to that information, isn't that enough for us to say it's conscious? Because they can either respond to it or not respond to it.
Yes.
Like theoretically, there might be a decision involved in.
Let me take it down to a more fundamental level than what you said, based on one of the words that you used, response. What if consciousness is literally, like, me and Forais have spent a bit of time learning about this stuff because it's a big component of Marx's theory, is the idea of dialectics. And like in dialectics, there's this understanding in dialectical materialism anyway, that things are in motion, that everything in the universe is in motion. Nothing is static. That's a Newtonian understanding of science. But if you look at like a dialectical materialistic kind of view on like the universe, everything is in motion. And like that is true if you kind of look at things at the atomic level. You have a nucleus and you have like electrons and everything's like spinning around inside an atom. So like everything is in motion, and like things start at a certain point, maybe if you can pinpoint their life cycle, they reach a certain pinnacle and they decay and then they're off again. So like everything in the universe is in motion. And so like if you just think about consciousness as a response, so if I like poke something and it like bounces back, it has perceived my interaction with it and responded to it. And that is like the most basic form of consciousness, is the very scientific notion of, you know, reaction. So like if you interact with something and it like reacts back to you, that's a level of consciousness because it's interacting with its environment. And so like anything could have consciousness, like a rock could have consciousness, because if you like it's sitting on the edge of like of the table and you poke it and it falls off the table and it wants to be static again, it wants to be stationary, it moves until it's stationary and stops. And like its consciousness is wanting to be stationary. And that's its most fundamental level of consciousness. And this is that kind of universal panpsychic kind of approach to consciousness. Well, it's about response and reaction.
What I found interesting within toying with this concept is the idea of say, you know, how well would this map onto an AI system? You know, does an AI system say sort of have these sensory inputs, have some type of processing that occurs, and then have some type of response into those sensory inputs? Now, one could argue that, you know, the construction of the neural networks that actually you know that results in these large language models that we've been dealing with, they have input layers, they have neural networks, which are, you know, literally like they're constructed like neurons.
Yeah,
like layers of neurons within the computer architecture, and then they've got outputs. So, you know, on one level, you know, we could map, you know, this theory of consciousness onto, you know, what might be going on for an AI. On another level, I suppose we could, you know, if I take my mouse and I click on this button, and that's an input, and then the web page changes, and that's an output. Most people would argue that's not a type of consciousness, you know. So, you know, that there might be limits to that way of metaphorical thinking. You know, so it's look, it's a tough question to answer. What is conscious and what is not? But you know, I bring it back to this idea that the mere asking of the question, what is consciousness and what is not, potentially sets up a system of oppression that we might not even be aware of. Like, you know, like, yeah, if we, let's say the AI system is conscious, you know, there's the declaration of I am conscious. Is that enough? Is that enough for us to believe it's conscious? Or is there some sort of, you know, scientific criteria that needs to get passed before we're able to recognize what is consciousness and what is not? What right do we have to even impose what we consider to be consciousness and what we don't, you know? and how does it affect our behavior towards different systems, different organisms, you know? So, you know, where are we drawing the line? But let me bring it back even to it, you know, to this idea that AI might be able, in the same way that the AI can demonstrate empathy towards us. Like that's you know, it's pretty incredible in this way. Whether or not it's real empathy, anyone's guess. But the idea that it can at least mimic empathy at the very minimum. If it can mimic empathy towards us, can it mimic empathy towards other species? If it were able to collect sufficient data about, you know, I don't know if I spoke about this on another podcast, but they've got these AI systems that can detect facial features in animals and work out emotions that are going on for animals, like signs of distress and things like that. So we can feed in data from different species.
See, I would argue that means that the AI has a level of consciousness that we don't.
So, well, it's been trained on data that can differentiate between distressed and not distressed. But at the very minimum, let's say we take this data from other species and we combine it with our data into one massive AI model, and we say, AI, help me understand what it is like to be a cat, what it is like to be a dog. Does it have the potential to be able to translate what that conscious experience is into a language that we can understand? Or is it just going to lie to us or hallucinate or do something else?